Janet lived across the street from where we lived. I was 16 at the time and would babysit for her regularly. She only moved in about 6 months ago, but made friends with my mom right away and asked if I would like to babysit every now and again. She was a single mom and had 2 girls, aged 3 and 5, who we'll call Becky and Lisa. They were the sweetest 2 girls and would giggle at everything and anything. When I would babysit, I would generally put the girls to bed at about 7 p.m., and then the rest of the night was my own. Free to watch movies and text boys, that sort of thing. Both the girls slept in the same room, and there was a camera set up so I could watch them on a baby monitor. There were other cameras set up as well that covered the rest of the house, inside and out. These were all linked to Janet's phone, and she had been very honest and upfront about them and said these weren't to spy on me, but for all our safety. I didn't mind and knew she would probably check on them every now and again, just to make sure everything was okay without having to disturb me. Janet was cool and would let me watch things I shouldn't without telling my parents. She would also make sure there was plenty of root beer and yummy convenience foods for me to indulge in once they were asleep. On this one particular night I was babysitting, Janet was working late and wouldn't be home until after midnight. I followed my usual routine and eventually fell asleep on the couch and was awoken to the house phone ringing. It was Janet. She was frantic and crying, saying she could see the silhouette of a man standing in the corner of the girl's bedroom. Without thought, I ran upstairs and ran straight into the bedroom, switched on the light, to find no one there. Janet was still on the phone. I told her there was no one there and even checked the closets and other rooms just to make sure. Janet appeared confused and said that no one left the bedroom as she was watching on the hall cameras and was convinced she saw someone in there. She settled down and said she would see if she could finish early and would be home as soon as she could. I told her not to rush and that everything was okay. I went back downstairs and helped myself to some pizza and rewound my movie to where I fell asleep. I continued to check the baby monitor frequently, and there was no movement of any kind. After about an hour or so, I heard crying from upstairs. I casually got up off the couch and walked up to the bedroom, thinking nothing of it, and flicked the light switch. Nothing but darkness. I got goosebumps as I entered the room, but didn't want to overthink it, as it was probably nothing. I went over to Becky, who was crying, and picked her up to comfort her. As I looked up, I noticed the closet door to be open slightly. I was certain I closed it earlier. I continued to look around the room while my eyes were still adjusting to the darkness, and then I saw the figure of a man standing in the corner of the room. He was dressed all in black with a hood up, so I could barely see his face, but I could see his eyes, and he was looking right at me. I froze. I didn't know what to do. We just stood there staring at each other for what seemed like an eternity. The man slowly started walking around the room, keeping eye contact with me. As he got closer to the door, he made a run for it downstairs and out the front door. I ran downstairs and locked the door and called my dad to come over. My dad stayed with me until Janet arrived home. Janet checked the footage with me, and my dad's still there. The man came out of the closet. I wasn't sure how this could happen, as I know I checked, and it was definitely empty. We all went upstairs to have a closer look, and found a trap door in the floor of the closet. Janet said she had never noticed it before, and I definitely didn't notice it. She had lived there for 6 months at this point, and was completely unaware of this door in the closet, and in her child's room no less. It was designed to be hidden, like a low-key panic room of some kind, so it kinda made sense that it had gone unnoticed. My dad climbed into the small space and said it was trashed, like someone had been living there. We don't know how he got in, or if it was possible to re-enter from the outside. Janet stayed with us that night with her kids, and the next day someone came to secure it. It was reported to the police, but we never found out who the man was.
Hey everyone, we truly appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to our channel for more upcoming stories and exciting content.
When I was a teenager, not yet allowed to work, I made my money the old-fashioned way, babysitting. It wasn't much, but that was how my parents decided I would purchase my own vehicle. I started doing it when I was 14, just around our house. Then, when I turned 15, I was able to branch out more and earn more clients. I still remember one family in particular that I babysat for only once. Once was enough to know that I never wanted to go back, no matter how much they paid me. The family lived only 2 streets over. I only gained them as potential clients when their mom mentioned to mine that they hadn't had a kid-free night since moving into our town. My mom knew that I was never stingy with who I worked for, so she gave them our number, and she called me the next weekend. I wasn't new to babysitting, and they only had 2 children, neither of them requiring diapers. I felt it was going to be a cakewalk. When they offered me $20 an hour, a whole $10 more than I was used to, I didn't think twice. It was their anniversary after all. My mom drove me to their house the following Saturday evening. She gave me the normal spill that every parent gives their daughter before letting them watch a stranger's children, a conversation that this family would soon repeat out of habit. Mostly, I zoned out as I stared at the outside world passing by. Typical teenage attitude. I remember pulling up to the house, realizing it was nothing like I was imagining in my head. I pictured a white picket fence family, but that isn't what answered the door. Instead, I was met with a striking woman wearing what looked like bohemian pants that were too flowy for me. The dirty blonde hair was piled on the top of her head with a blue claw clip. She was bubbly when she invited me inside, and she waved my mother off. The interior of the house was painted in dark greens and had several plants littered throughout. The dad rarely made his presence known, barely coming out from his office. The woman introduced herself as Missy, and her 2 kids were Lily and Landon. They were 8-year-old twins, and while I never asked, I assumed identical judging on appearance. Both of them seemed equally unimpressed by my arrival, giving knowing looks between each other when they thought I wasn't paying attention. Missy was still flitting around her house while spouting house rules and assuring me that I could eat whatever they had available, and that they would try to be back at a reasonable hour, that all important numbers were on the counter. The last parting words she spoke were simple reminders that neither twin had any allergies, no medical problems, and that if they got too wired up before bed, their pediatrician okayed the use of melatonin. I nodded and made mental notes of the information flying my way, trying not to usher them out of their own house. Once they left, I closed the door and locked both of the locks right away. Turning around, the twins stood at the base of the stairs, just watching me. Neither one of them spoke to me, opting to retreat into the living room and plop down in front of the television. It was weird, sure, but I thought it was just their annoyance at having a strange girl in their home to boss them around. I let them lead the way, following behind to take a seat on the opposite couch. I rotated my gaze between the 2 of them and the television. Satisfied that they were fine right where they were, I jumped when a piercing scream came from the screen. They had turned on Halloween, and Michael Myers was in the middle of a hot pursuit with Jamie Lee Curtis. Shooting up, I grabbed the remote from the coffee table and switched it to something more age-appropriate. The last thing I needed were 2 kids having nightmares the entire night. I'd never be invited back. They gave me the obligatory huff of disapproval as they settled back down. It remained silent except for the talk of the kids on the screen, until a noise came from upstairs. It was a soft thud, almost like something falling onto a carpet. I looked to the ceiling and back, but if the kids heard it, they never let on. 2 seconds later, it sounded like a shuffle of feet above us. I felt my muscles tense as I sat there debating the next move. I decided I would just ask them if they heard anything, but to my shock, they both said no. Nothing else, just no. The evening continued as normal, jumping between snacks and making sure the kids brushed their teeth. Them both being older helped tremendously, knowing that I wasn't having to micromanage. At 9 p.m., both kids had happily dozed off on the couch, watching some cartoon about a purple dog. Things had been relatively normal up until that point, making it possible to assume that whatever I heard earlier was just the house settling. I lost myself again into a book that I had brought along for a situation like this and curled up into the recliner. I made it 3 chapters until another noise. This time, it sounded louder, like something being thrown into the ground. Slamming the book shut, I popped up onto my feet. The twins were still motionless on the sofa, snoring away. My heart was racing, and I could feel my mouth turning to cotton. I still had the parents' number, but I didn't want to ruin a date night. Bracing myself with a few deep breaths, I made my way to the foot of the steps and peered into the shadowy darkness. I wasn't able to see much before I realized I was going to have to go upstairs. Dread was coursing through my veins as I ascended the steps, graciously realizing that a single nightlight was lighting the hall from a wall plug. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I did a few sweeps across the hall until my eyes landed on a shattered picture frame that was in the center of the hallway. I picked it up and looked for glass that potentially shot across the floor, but nothing. I flipped the frame over and saw a couple standing there. The couple were in their later years, both wearing church clothes. The woman was dressed in a blue knee-length dress, and the man wore suit pants and a button-down top with a bow tie. I couldn't make much else out in the photo due to the lighting, but I placed it on a table that sat at the far end of the hall, just to get it out of the floor. I almost laughed at myself, until I heard it. The noise was ear-splitting from where I was standing, and the vibrations I felt through the floor told me that whatever happened, it was right behind me. For once, I didn't want to turn around, but I had to in order to get back to ground level and check on the kids. Slowly, I pivoted to look back down the hallway, and to my horror, saw steps that had unfolded from the ceiling, landing behind me. That was the clash I heard. I took a few hesitant steps closer, being aware to not step too close to them. It was the steps that led to attics, that much I knew. I also knew that those didn't just fall normally. I circled around them until I was at the base of the last step, staring at the gaping hole it left in the wall. An awful screeching noise flowed through the opening, causing goosebumps to form on my arms. I wanted to leave the house instantly, but I was also curious to see what secrets were hidden away. At the base, I lifted one foot to the step, about to head up. "I wouldn't do that." A boy's voice came from the top of the staircase that led to the first floor. I turned to see both of them standing there, just looking at me. They weren't bothered by the noises. I couldn't find the words I wanted to say, so I just gawked at them. "They don't like it when we go up there." That was the only thing they would offer up. I even tried to explain that I needed to close the door back, but they were adamant that I shouldn't touch it. Even when I tried, they came alive with panic. It took a few tries, but when I saw that their mind was made up, I walked back down with them and tucked them back onto the sofa. I remained in the recliner until a few minutes past midnight when the front door opened. I had never been happier to see a family return home in my life. I stood up to greet them, and when I mentioned the steps, it was the oddest sight. It was like they knew about it. They just exchanged looks until the dad cleared his throat and offered to take me home. I agreed because I was too fearful to even attempt to walk, even if it was only a few streets away. As we made the turn onto my street, I resolved I wouldn't babysit there again anyway, and looked at the father. "What was that?" His hands tightened on the wheel until we parked in the drive, and he looked at me. His eyes were tired, bags now visible on the skin below. "It's nothing. The kids think there's some evil entity in a blue dress that stays up there. One time they even thought it was their grandmother. Now it's just evil. A normal kid's imagination." Breath left my lungs as I remembered the photo that had fallen from the wall. I fumbled the door trying to get out of his car and raced into my own house, locking myself inside. I'm not one to get carried away in all that stuff, but I will say that I never went back there after that. I also don't doubt the kids, but whatever was causing those steps to come crashing down inches behind me, I don't think it was their beloved grandmother. When I was about 14, I used to babysit a few kids from families who knew my parents. There was this one kid named Mike who lived on my street. Mike was about 6 or 7 at the time, and his parents often went out with friends for meals to high-end restaurants and bars. I used to babysit Mike at least once a week, and the kid took a real liking to me, and he was never any trouble, so it used to be a lot of fun. Looking back, he was probably my most favorite kid to babysit. I learned that letting kids stay up a little past bedtime gave me some leverage to get them to behave and do as they're asked. I would always let Mike stay up a little past bedtime. We would play Plants vs. Zombies for hours and have Mario Kart contests. His dad was an avid gamer, so he had lots of different consoles all set up in a spare bedroom or man cave on the upper floor. We weren't allowed to play in there, so Mike's dad would set up some games downstairs for us. On this particular occasion, I arrived about 6 p.m., just as Mike's parents were due to leave. They gave me the same instructions they did every time. Keep the doors locked, help yourself to anything in the fridge, no liquor past 8, and in bed for 9. The liquor was a joke, but a joke they made every time. They'd ordered us a pizza, and once they left, we sat down straight away to start our gaming. After about an hour or so, the batteries in Mike's controller died. Mike mentioned his dad had a charger pack upstairs in his room and said his dad wouldn't get mad if we went in just to get it. Mike ran upstairs, and I went to get us some more sodas. As I was in the kitchen, I heard a loud bang and a scream. Mike came running down the stairs in a panic, shouting some gibberish saying someone else was in the house. He wasn't really making much sense, and so I had to calm him down in order to actually string a sentence together. Mike told me that he got the battery pack, and as he was walking out of the room, he heard a creak behind him. He turned around and couldn't really see anything, but as he turned to leave, he saw a shadow behind the curtains that was highlighted from the streetlights outside. I told him it was probably just a trick of the light and that I would go and check. I wasn't overly concerned, as I know how kids always think there's something under the bed or in their closet. Mike wasn't usually one of these kids, but I knew all the doors were locked and it was a safe neighborhood. Mike didn't want to be left alone, so he came upstairs with me and took me to where he saw the shadow. There was no one there. We checked the other rooms too, and nothing. We went back downstairs and continued to play games, when all of a sudden we heard a loud crash and what appeared to be footsteps moving around upstairs. Me and Mike looked at each other, showing fear in our eyes. I grabbed Mike's hand, dropped the controller, and ran out the front door. We went to the Winston's house next door and banged as loud as we could, screaming to call 911. We explained what happened, and despite Mrs. Winston's pleas, Mr. Winston grabbed a baseball bat and ran round to the house. Mr. Winston was a relatively stocky guy, and you could tell from his stature that he was definitely some kind of athlete or bodybuilder or something, especially in his younger days. Mr. Winston came back about 10 minutes later, just as the police were arriving. He told the police that he didn't find anyone inside, but he did notice the back door was wide open. I remember hearing the police saying it was likely that whoever it was long gone, but they would check everything just to make sure it was safe. About 20 minutes later, the police came out with a man in cuffs. Neither me or Mike recognized the man, and as it turns out, he opened the door as a decoy and went to hide in the basement. The weird thing is, there's no way this man could have gotten into the house when I was there, as I was always making sure everything's locked, which means he was already in the house. I never did find out why they believed him to be there, but I never babysat for Mike after that. To be honest, I never babysat anyone. It wasn't that I was scared, I just didn't want to be responsible for someone else's child if ever there was another break-in. Next time, we might not be so lucky, and I really didn't want that responsibility.